Hey everyone, it's Lisa Sweeney here from Business in Heels, and thank you so much for joining us for the discussion on gender equality best practices, a deep dive into the practices and behaviours that led to a number of these people being involved in gender equity. So whether you're a dedicated equity advocate or simply curious, this is the discussion that you don't want to miss. We'll be exploring this with our gender equity advocates, Bianca Harty-Hazelman, Jay Westbury, Penelope Cottrell, and Tyler Lovering. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we join today's meeting. For me, it's the Wathaurong people. Can I ask any of you to add yours into the chat? And on our behalf, I pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and future. And in the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to the land, sea, and community. And I pay my respects to the elders, past and present. We extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. So welcome. Now, many of you know that we run the Gender Equity Awards for Australia. It's now into its 4th year. And I'm excited to say that there are only 2 days left to go to get your entries in. It closes 1st of August at midnight. So for those of you who are the last minute people, and there are loads of them out there, we encourage you to get it in by tomorrow night or contact us if there's a few last minute things you need help with. So why are we doing these webinars? Well, because we want to accelerate gender equity to make workplaces great places to be. So by sharing our best practices, ideas, things that you can adopt, we hope that you all don't have to go through the trial and error that these people here today perhaps have been through. So now it's my pleasure to introduce to you some of the panelists, and we'll get going. So our first panelist to introduce is Tyler Lovering. He's the VP and General Manager for APAC for Conga. And with over 2 decades of experience in sales leadership and strategic account management, Tyler brings a wealth of global expertise to his role as VP and GM. His career has spanned diverse industries, geographies, including Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the US, India, and across Southeast Asia, building high-performing teams and driving customer success at every turn. So, Tyler, welcome. You've got a wealth of experience. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And I'm really, really honored to be a part of this discussion today. It's really, really important. Thank you.
So share with us a little bit about why you're so passionate about gender equity.
Well, for me, it comes down to sort of 2 things. The first is, I believe that having a diversity of opinion is really, really important to any successful business. In my experience, the best outcomes often come when we bring together different perspectives, whether that's shaped by gender, culture, upbringing, or life experiences. And I think these differences challenge our thinking. They can spark innovation and ultimately lead to better decisions and stronger results. And the second reason is a personal one. I've got a wife who's a mother. I have a sister. I've got so much respect for the incredible women in my life. And I think we'd all agree that we want that respect to translate into their careers as well. So that's why those 2 things are super important to me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. The next person to introduce is Penelope Cottrell. She's the Principal Consultant at Bendelta and lead author of the Best Places to Work Roundtable Report. She's well qualified to comment on gender equity after serving for the past 2 years as Education and Research Executive Manager at WGEA. So welcome, Penelope. Lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
As you know, I'm a huge fan of your work, so I'm delighted.
A huge fan of your work, so I'm delighted to join you.
Cool. It's lovely to have you too. I think you might have your audio on in 2 spots, so hopefully we're. Why don't you share with us a little bit about why you're so passionate about gender equity?
Thank you. I think I've the sound worked out now.
Yeah, beautiful.
I am a bit late to this because for most of my career, I didn't really think about gender, and that was on purpose. I wanted to be seen as the senior person doing senior work, not a woman doing women's work. But that did change when I had children because suddenly gender wasn't abstract anymore and it was actually inescapable. And those assumptions, those structures, and all those unspoken penalties, they were real and they had been shaping my career and the careers of others all along. And then I got into the data. So, through my work at the Workplace Gender Equality Agency and my behavioural science studies, it became really clear that the data doesn't lie, and we have a long way to go in terms of achieving gender equality. And the good news, and the reason I'm really excited about this ongoing conversation and progress, is because again the data don't lie. When we get diversity right or better, gender diversity and other kinds of diversity too, everybody wins. So it's not a zero-sum game. My favourite example is flexible work, because if you survey Australian men and women, they both want to work flexibly to the same extent. And this predates COVID, but men didn't take up that option to the same extent as women because of their perceived career penalties. Yet when we normalise flexible work, take away those penalties, everybody wins. Women and men, and the children who would like to spend time with both their parents. So I think it's actually a win-win conversation we're having.
Yeah, fantastic. I love the perspective. Thanks for sharing that with us. Our next panelist is Jay Westbury. As the CEO of the Franchise Council of Australia, he's responsible for leading the council as an association for both franchisors and franchisees. So Jay brings over 2 decades of experience in leading peak industry bodies as CEO and has previously been the chair and vice chair of industry groups both in Australia and globally. The sectors he's previously worked across have close ties to franchising, giving Jay a deep understanding of the unique challenges and opportunities within the industry. So welcome, Jay. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Can you share with us why you're so passionate about gender equity?
Look, from a personal point of view, and just picking up on what Tyler said earlier, I'm a father of 2 daughters, one of which is 13. And I watch even her now, the way she's going through her school life with the challenges of being a young girl and playing. She loves touch football, which is not necessarily a default sport for females. And of course, this discussion has become ever more complicated as a result of the way sport is being used now in the gender discussion. And of course, as a young woman at 13, if that's how she likes to be referred, her views are being formulated by the peers around her and the senior people around her and the parents and the teachers. And from my point of view, I'd like to think that and perhaps I'm a dreamer, that when she steps out into the workforce, perhaps sessions like this will not be as necessary as they clearly are, because, she's growing up with those influences around her. So I'm leaning in on that basis. I'm also leaning in for someone that works very much in the political sphere, where we are seeing some just outstanding women step out from perhaps wherever they were and really taking on in a pretty awesome way. And I don't want to be political. Let's forget about what they're saying, but the way they're taking forward their messaging with such gusto and enthusiasm is a testament, because they're on the TV, people are seeing them, younger people are seeing it, all of us, regardless of our gender, are seeing these people. So I think they are doing a great job, almost in an unconscious way, of attempting to break down some of these barriers. So that's why I'm leaning in.
Awesome. Thank you. And we all hope we are out of a job in this sphere in the next little while. But at the moment, I think Bianca will no doubt give me the years, but I think it's 2,136 or something along those lines. And so our last panelist to introduce is Bianca Harty-Hazelman. She's the author of the Financier Women's Index and the founder of the Impactor app, which helps businesses with diversity, equity and inclusion. She works with organisations to drive workplace systemic gender equity and inclusion change through data. So welcome, Bianca. And she's also the winner of the Gender Equity Awards in the CEO category, not last year, but the year before. So well placed to join us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and to meet everybody on this panel as well. And thank you for everyone joining us. I suppose what's driven me I feel like I was born a feminist, to be frank. I've loved sport my whole life. And my brother is like my best my best friend, and I never felt I was any different to the way he would play sports, so I'd go at it. But I was always kind of brought back to reality on several fronts. And Jay, it kind of makes me emotional when you were talking before about watching your daughter. I'm now at a point watching my daughters go through rep and different sports and things. And I'm so excited by how sport has evolved over the years. And it's for that very reason, these these moments in time that you experience yourself so personally, that have driven my desire to try to change the status quo around gender equity, not just for myself and what I'm up against as a female leader at this point in time, but importantly for future generations, for my own children, those around them, girls and boys, because I see the benefits as being huge to the conversations, but most importantly to the narratives that we tell ourselves. So for me, as a financial journalist previously, and I still contribute the odd thing here and there when I'm not consulting to corporates, it's around trying to close this perception gap that exists around what is a lived reality and what is that very public conversation about what's happening in the private conversations as well. And for me, when we start to narrow in on that and we can do more and more through data, through programs and vice versa, we do start to see real progress happen that people get excited about. And that's what I suppose I live for, but it's those outcomes for future generations. And I will say that the median time frame for equality in this country is looking at about 24 years we expect to get there. And that's just based on the gender pay gap alone. There are so many other areas, such as unpaid work, where it's sitting at nearly 50 years for some form of equality. So there's a lot to do, and it's not going away anytime soon, but certainly I do share the vision where we dream of a place where this is old hat for a discussion.
Yeah, we look forward to that. But for now, let's explore some communication biases. And we'll start off with a few examples to get everyone going. So just to set the scene, communication biases cover numerous different interactions that happen in business and society. These behaviours range from interruption patterns, speaking time, contributions in meetings, assumptions based on parental status, and encouragement bias, to name a few. So what we plan to do is to discuss each scenario and explore different ways our panelists would handle this. So to start it off, we're going to talk about assuming authority. In professional settings, people might automatically assume that men to be in leadership positions. So Tyler, you have an example that you'd like to share with us around assuming authority. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, certainly. And I think I've kind of broken this down. I spoke to a number of the female leaders in my team, and I kind of looked at sort of cultural, conscious, and unconscious. And so I'm in sales. I sell software, and so I thought this is a really common example that I would dare say we've all seen in some way, shape, or form. So the context of the example is, your team is presenting to executives from a potential customer, and you have the lead, the star of the show is a female. Let's call her Sarah for today, and she's the lead solutions engineer. Two male supporting casts, Tom and James. So the account executive, does his introduction, says, let me introduce the team working on this initiative. First of all, Tom, who's been doing some great requirements gathering. We have James, who's been supporting the demo build, and Sarah, who'll be taking you through the product demonstration today. Now, that seems like I think a fairly ordinary introduction to this sort of thing. But when you take a look at it, you look at, all right, what was in the order of that introduction? The men are introduced first, despite just playing a supporting role. The language that are being used, the men's contributions are kind of action oriented and very specific. And Sarah's role is, and she'll just be taking you through the demonstration today. Now, I see this from time to time, and I don't think it's intentional, but if this pattern, persists or repeats, where men are constantly introducing the other men first, they're described more favorably, I think it reinforces a hierarchy that just doesn't reflect the actual roles and responsibilities. So I thought, out of all of the examples that I had, that was probably something that those of us in sales probably see or have seen from time to time, or maybe not from time to time, maybe more often.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that with us. So let's go around. So Penelope, how would you recommend that the team could handle this? And, any other advice for the people, for Sarah, on what she could do if that was the situation?
Thank you. That is such a great and chilling example, Tyler, because it's so, as you say, we've all seen it, right?
Yeah.
And so what do we do when we see that? My go-to here is this sensational book by Marianne Siegert called The Authority Gap, where she relentlessly uncovers all of this with sort of devastatingly data, because it's all about women, no matter how senior, are often just assumed to have less authority than men, and that can show up in subtle ways. And Ty's given us a lovely example there where, maybe no one called out because maybe it was on the edge of not okay, but sort of okay. So in that grey area, the authority gap thrives. So the advice that she gives, which I think is really helpful, that individuals can take within their own organisations, is firstly just to actually name it. And so when we make the authority gap visible, then we can actually spot it in real time and do something about that. So what might someone have done? Maybe Sarah herself could have spoken first and introduced herself in that example, but also really importantly, it's people who are not Sarah stepping in to name it too and saying, let's hear from the person in charge first. Sarah, is that you, for example? So I think when we kind of name it, that's one step we can take. And secondly, a really powerful thing that I've been doing, and it's actually because it's so easy and it really makes a difference, is to make authority explicit and just say, I'm actually in charge today, so I'll be taking you through today's presentation because I've led the team that did this. Or I am the executive manager of education and research, so I'll be sharing this data with you today. Or, Jane is actually the lead partner on this, so she'll be taking us through today's thinking. So to actually name it so no one's guessing about where the authority lies can actually undercut people's wrong assumptions. And the third thing is actually just some meeting protocols can go a long way as well in terms of, I know we'll cover this in a bit, so I won't go too far into this, but in terms of sharing airtime and rotating roles and so forth, can also just help people see women in this speaking and leadership role and just to normalise that.
Nice work. Thank you. Jay, what advice would you give?
Look, my sort of example or what I'm drawing on is in the government space. What they've become very good at ensuring that you know who you're talking to, and by nature of title, it doesn't. I mean, to a degree, the title precedes then who's sitting in the chair, and so it's an amazing way to normalise all of those functions because it could be a man or it could be a woman, right? And I think they've gotten very good at that because if the deputy secretary of the department of whatever is sitting there and it's a woman, and I do a lot of these sort of meetings, it is immediately different dynamic. The other thing that I've seen, and picking a little bit up on what Penelope was just saying, was table positioning. It's quite incredible how government has become very good at that to ensure that you really don't have to wonder who is in charge, just the way in which it's done. And then just recently we had an interaction with the new small business minister, Dr. Anne Alley, female, and she definitely brought a completely different dynamic that I haven't seen before, that just dispelled all of that by way of positioning, by way of her personally taking the lead and introducing people effectively in a hierarchical way. And again, normalized to a degree, it wouldn't have mattered whether it was a male or woman, but you weren't left wondering. And then of course, when said person, let's go with Sarah as the name, spoke, the room sat up because they knew she was the deputy secretary and therefore pay attention. So it's an interesting, from my perspective, that it looked to me that had been pre-thought and built that way. It didn't naturally come. It'll be great one day when that just naturally comes. But I do think the government is doing a good job in leading into those sort of settings and perhaps removing some of those sort of natural biases that happen when a man's sitting there and people presume he's the boss. Certainly not the case in government, unless because of the Prime Minister, because at the moment that's a man.
No, that's great. It's a good idea. Bianca, what thoughts do you have to add with this? Oh, you're on mute.
I think they're all really terrific responses. I think I've definitely been that person in the room where it's been my meeting and I am the silent partner in the room. And it became exhausting to interrupt. And even when I interrupted, it was spoken over and different things like that. And I like all the ideas, this interruption room, setting agendas before you're going in. These are all things I recall doing very well before the interview or the meeting was planned, and this went on for many weeks. And if I reflect on what I could have done better, and I hate telling people to, it's not the structure of everything. It's you can do stuff too, but in this respect, I had to focus inwards on myself. I did not take control of the situation. I allowed myself to be railroaded. I really did, because I felt that I was just being pushed to the sideline to the point that it got up my natural defenses. And I think sometimes that can be the worst thing you can do in order to reclaim your power back in that situation and have that voice. It's important to remember these little voices and the struggle that goes on within your head. You can have all the dynamics and put in place the best plans beforehand, but you really must front up like you are taking that lead in those situations. That's learning for me.
Yeah, that's a great point too, Bianca. I mean, as you rightly shared, you don't always feel that. Sometimes as a victim, you're a little shocked or stunned by the situation unfolding. A physical presence, like actually standing up and having a physical presence, is a good way to also stop the meeting a little bit and just reclaim that space. So back to you, Tyler. What were your thoughts on how you've handled this, and any other advice you'd like to share on this?
Yeah, well, I knew I was going to learn a lot from you folks, so I've been feverishly taking notes. So, look, if I'm in the meeting and things like this happen, whether it be questions being directed wrongly, I will say, actually, that's a question for the person, Sarah in this case, fictional character, of course. And so, if I'm in the meeting, I can take a leadership role and take that power and redirect it appropriately. But like any good sales team, you have pre-meeting planning, and you have a post-event planning. And I think raising that awareness, and then we have a weekly 360 feedback loop. And I think just that constant awareness, constantly taking a look inwardly and outwardly, feeding back to the team, to me, consistently, right? Feedback shouldn't just be coming when you do something good or do something bad. It has to be a weekly set in your agenda every week. And I think those three things: taking control if you're in the meeting as a leader, raising the awareness if you see something that's just not quite right, and then giving that constant, consistent feedback is how I kind of handle those sorts of situations.
Fabulous. A really good roadmap. So let's move on to our next topic, which is kind of related. So let's talk a little bit about speaking time in meetings. Women might get less speaking time during meetings, or their ideas might be overlooked. Sometimes people pick up on them and claim them as their own later. Penelope, you've seen this happen. Do you want to share with us an example and set the scene for us?
Sure. I mean, I think we've all been there, and like Bianca, I guess I've been that person in the room who's been overlooked. So I remember a presentation. I had done all this work for a large engineering company, and I was presenting to their CEO and executives, who are all men, with my colleague who was a man, and I could see the room literally startle when I spoke. And I thought, wow, that had a physical reaction to hearing my voice. And I realized how little they sit in that boardroom and hear a woman's voice. It's just so unusual. It actually struck them. And people commented on it at the time and said, wow, it's nice to hear your voice. And I thought, well, this is really odd that it's such an unusual phenomenon that they actually are reacting physically to it. But we know there's some great catalyst research that shows that women get, startling, 25% less speaking time in group discussions compared with male peers, for example. And there's just data upon data upon data to show this is the case. And despite that, the awareness is very low. One thing I have started to do as part of the work I do with leaders on their own development, and it's so easy now with this technology that we're using today, for example, is just to actually look, like just do a timestamp and see who is speaking in these meetings. And there's one leader I spoke with who thought they were very inclusive. And I said to them after a meeting that they had led with their team, how much time do you think you spent listening in that meeting? And they said, oh, I mean, the whole time. And I said, okay, you spoke 80% of the time. And they just didn't know. And that's not uncommon. So I think, those examples abound. I think what's the challenge is people's awareness of how much airtime they are taking, whether that's taking less than their share or taking more than their share. I think we can do a lot, really simple interventions to raise awareness that can help people self-correct their behaviour.
And as you say, AI is such a great tool for that nowadays. You can even, there's a few apps now, I think, can't you chart to how many women are in the meeting and what sort of time is allocated. So Jay, over to you. What are your thoughts? You're on mute now too.
There we go. I think I can definitely relate to what's being discussed. And again, I'll just draw on this sort of most recent government experience where there were, the women outnumbered men for starters, which, at the tea break, men talked about that, obviously, because it was an odd feeling. And of course, that's a feeling that women have had no doubt for decades. So more power to them. But what government certainly has done is really gotten tight with time allocation. And so then whoever is the chair, regardless of being male or female, if they're a good chair and they say, well, look, I'm sorry, Fred, but your time's expired. I'm sorry, Mary, your time's expired. That does provide an opportunity or a tool in certain meetings to enable a fairness so that regardless of who you are, you're not getting chopped off because if you've got a lot to say, talk fast. You've been allocated your time, and that's that. And you're going to get cut no matter where you sit. So that government has got very good at that. And certainly we try to some degree deploy that, maybe even in a subconscious way in some of the things that we do. I know Lisa's on this call from my management team, and she's probably having a giggle right now about it. But you in a room full of people with ideas and opinions, I completely acknowledge that sometimes the female voice will be overspoken, and I'm as a leader myself, I'm often very conscious of it.
Good. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. Interesting to hear what the government's doing too, isn't it? Bianca, do you have any research to add to how this impacts things long term, or advice to add?
Yeah, I mean, the talk about a woman's voice tending to be overheard, this is something that research has long shown, and a lot of it is pointed to speaking lower and being heard and amplified, and those squeaky voices having like a shrill reaction to in some spaces. And there's a lot of bias into the tonality of a voice. And, I was at our daughter's netball the other day screaming my lungs out. It's probably why I nearly lost my voice. She didn't hear me, but she heard maybe the 2 or 3 times that my husband yelled out because he was that much, louder or just a different level of loud. So I think there is this little unconscious bias around the sounds, and that has led over many, many years to this development here. And there's so many other factors at play here. But I think what I find works from a cultural perspective is these feedback loops are really important. And often a lot of managers that I work with are not really aware that this is going on. And it takes a really good manager to have all these frameworks in place to ensure that that the meetings are effective and people are being heard. I love these feedback loops. I love the use of AI and using, for example, Gemini to really track how much conversation was had. And importantly, I think what's really quite critical is as we get more savvy with the different tools that are out there and the ability, like gender fitness, you can track people and voices in your meetings. Is ultimately, if you're not listening and if you're not allowing these people to speak in this kind of market, you've got a talent leak problem brewing if it's not already happening. I'm seeing more and more companies having to, I'm working with them to attract and retain more women. And it's coming back to these different cultural issues that we need to address. And often it's a line manager role where we're seeing those things come undone.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that with us. Tyler, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I love that, giving everyone their voice. One of the things that I've done at a corporate level is it's a small thing, but it has made a pretty big impact. So I introduced in our region, nominating a rotating host for our monthly all hand calls. Now it might sound simple, but it's had a meaningful impact. So each month I pick a different team member, regardless of their level or function or gender, obviously takes the lead in running our regional all hands meeting. So what's been the most rewarding to see people step up? They step up and lead the meeting. Often for the first time in a regional forum, I had an incredible young woman who's on the team. She's from India. She said to me, Tyler, this is the first time I've ever led a meeting, let alone a regional all hands. I mean, my heart just melted, right? I didn't think much of it, but that was so huge. So, for the people that don't have the loudest voice in the room, it's a chance to be seen and heard and recognized and lead. And I think at a corporate level, that's made a really big impact for my team.
Love it. And Penelope, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that?
I think I love hearing everyone else's examples, actually. I think one thing that we did in the organisation I was at the time is to think about where are the moments where we can be inclusive on purpose and intentional. And Bianca, your point about middle managers often being the kind of point where this can all go awry is absolutely right and borne out by the data. And we, in the work I'm doing now with 160 chief people officers across Australia, this is a crisis. There's so much on that layer of management. And so one thing we can do to take it off that layer of management, so it doesn't have to be part of their strong skill set, is to build it into protocols. And for us, we did that through meetings. And that means setting meetings up from the beginning to say, we are going to share the airtime, and I'm going to be keeping an eye on that. So keep an eye on your own airtime, because if you're speaking up too much, I'm going to ask you to stop. So you use your time budget wisely. And if I'm not hearing from you, I am going to call on you. So just best be prepared, and actually running meetings in that way. And that had a really important effect from a broad inclusion perspective, not just a gender diversity. We found a huge change in the cultural diversity outcomes we could achieve, because culturally some people, some of my colleagues who are women from a South East Asian background said, there's no way I'm going to pipe up in a meeting unless you call on me, because I don't think it's polite. That's just not culturally going to happen. So let's find a different way to include my voice, please. And from people from other cultural backgrounds saying, I will not barge my way into a meeting to contribute. You are going to need to invite me, and I prefer to do that in the chat or in writing, because I just need to do it that way, because I've got to think about it first or whatever. So being inclusive by design is really easy, actually. And if we build it into protocols rather than relying on managers' skills, we can make it kind of quite easeful as well.
And I think you've touched on something really important there, Penelope, about, all the cultural diversity. For many of you guys working in global roles, the minute you start bringing in other countries and other cultural norms, you do have to be mindful that people want to behave in very different ways and react very differently. Some do not like being put on the spot, and some do not want to be brought in. Some want to have the conversation elsewhere. So, that opens up that whole intersectionality complexity around gender diversity and inclusion. So the next can of worms. Anyway, we'll continue moving along. So our next topic to explore is interruption patterns. In group discussions, men might interrupt women more frequently than they interrupt other men. This can undermine often the women's ability to contribute effectively, and can be perceived as a form of dominance or dismissal of the woman's input. So Jay, you have an example of this that you can share with us?
I do, and I'm off mute. That's great. Look, my example is from a governance meeting in the travel industry. It was a global governance meeting. There was about 23 people in the room, people from 20 different countries, and it was a very eclectic group. Curiously and interestingly, the chair was a woman, and there was only one other woman in the room. Now, as it turned out, that woman was the subject matter expert. And I had had a coffee with her before going into the room, and met her, and knew going in that, we're so lucky to have her in the room. Anyway, so the chair introduced the woman as the subject matter expert, and she started to talk. And within moments, not minutes, moments, a whole heap of the men from various different cultural backgrounds, from various different countries, in all sorts of languages, because we had interpretive devices on, started interrupting and interjecting, and said that the facts were not clear, and that their views were important, clearly indicating that the woman's view wasn't important suddenly, and the interference to it was that the woman's view wasn't important. And to my surprise, the female chair just allowed this to go on, and I was sitting there thinking to myself, well, this is not right. It was an awkward situation. We've all got our little flags in front of us, and so I just put my hand up and said, oh, look up, Madam Chair. And I said, I'm not sure whether you all are aware, but let's call her Mary. Mary's the subject matter expert. I've flown from Australia to hear what she's got to say, and I really think we should just allow her to speak. And I think the rest of you should just all be quiet until she's managed to speak. And of course, she picked up exactly where she left off, not rattled at all. I mean, it was an amazing experience for her. And she was probably in her 30s. She was immaculately dressed, looking the part, if that's in fact a thing that should matter. And she had impeccable slides and impeccable content. And I was wondering at the time whether, if she'd been a 35-year-old guy, whether that had actually happened in that setting. And I suspect it wouldn't have. Now, she went on to rule the room, and everybody ended up, you could have heard a pin drop in the end once she was allowed the moment. And I suppose afterwards I did speak to the chair, because I was puzzled that she didn't pull everybody up, but I think she herself was taken aback as to how to handle that situation.
And it's a very good one. So let's go around, everyone, and let's discuss it. So Bianca, do you have some advice or information to share on this?
Yeah, I love this one because I've seen really wonderful male and vice versa female chairs. I can recall one female chair in particular who was absolutely focused and pointed in her ability to share the word around. And I think what you did by interjecting was really chair the room. And I think it's such a critical role having a chair that understands the importance of voice and inclusivity there. I feel the focus and the power that enables flowing forward, I don't think it can be underestimated. So I've seen it to play out similar to you, where a chair's been really good at what they do and when they haven't. The question I've got is, what if you just don't have a chair that is that good, and you don't have a J in the room to stand up? What then becomes of you? That's the challenge, I suppose. But thank you for stepping in and doing that, Jay. We certainly need more chairs that are able to see the value in doing that.
I think back to that, I've actually felt, and I've often thought about it, and when this came up, it immediately popped into my head, thinking I really should have said something sooner. And I felt bad about that for a long time, actually.
But I think that's part of the challenge of these situations, because they always catch people a little unawares, and it's, unless you've got something planned in the moment that you can jump in, and this is how I diffuse these situations, which is why we're having these conversations, so people can get in their minds, what are those little one or two things that I could have done differently to stop that faster, sooner. It should alleviate some of those challenges. So let's go over to Tyler. What are your thoughts on this, Tyler?
Yeah, Jay, I want to say that I'd like to hope I had the courage to do something like that, but especially in that environment, it's great. I think, I talked about it in the sort of first segment, and if you're in the room, I think as a leader, it's your responsibility to dictate and to make sure that the flow of the conversation is in an appropriate way. I'm really lucky I get to work for a really great company. And I think, I talked about that 360 feedback loop, and, we have quarterly assessments of our performance. Now, it's not only our sales or our revenue generation, it's also as it relates to our company values. And so we have 3 company values, right? So it's champion the customer, innovative spirit, and be a team player. And so every quarter, when you're rated out of 10, five points are based on your performance as per your targets, and 5 points are based on how you're living the Congo way. And so if you are not being a team player, and this is a fantastic example of not being a team player, you can't score a 10 out of 10. Therefore, it's linked to your annual salary and your performance and into your enhancement. And so it's a really great way for me as a leader to continually remind people that, if someone's not motivated by doing the right thing, or they have a mortgage, or they're putting their kids through school like I am, it's really linked to your behavior. And I think that having a company that actually bases their values or puts their values on paper and allows you to not achieve a 10 out of 10 score unless you're living those values is really, really useful. But I just applaud you. I think that was a really, really cool example. Thank you for that.
Mm. And this is why we love having Congo as part of the Gender Equity Awards, and a thank you on behalf of Business and Heels for that. But, great values. And I think this idea of linking values to behaviour, to performance is so important. So Penelope, what are your thoughts, and how can we limit these sorts of biases?
This is a terrific example because, it just happens all the time. And there's data, layers and layers and layers of data to show that it's not in our minds, it's real. I think for me, a big reframe that I have, which helped me to feel differently about taking action for myself and for others, was to recognize that interruptions aren't just bad manners, they are a form of exclusion. And when I became clearer on that in my own mind, it felt easier for me to do things like say, let's call him Zach. Zach, we'll come to discussion in a minute. I'm going to finish the presentation first and just take that back. And I've done that a number of times, and people don't mind, actually. I was surprised to discover. So the first time I really kind of felt my stomach kind of sink, and I was really anxious about people going to hate me because I've taken back my space and my speaking slot, by the way. And people don't mind. So that then gave me, I guess, the courage to do that more frequently, because it's not just about reacting to bad manners, it's about resisting a form of exclusion.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great way to reframe it. And back to you, Jay. Was there anything else that you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, I think, I'd say this, that, in certain settings, I mean, this was in a global setting. It was all very fancy. It was in Geneva, la, la, la. It all sounds very fancy, right? And there were little flags, and it was intimidating, and some of the people that were there were very senior people, very, very senior people. But there's no excuse. And I think back that you either go in with a preset mind of doing the right thing and not let your surroundings sort of overwhelm you. Because in the end, as Penelope said, you've just got to speak out. And, I'm so glad I did when I think back to it. And in fact, so too was the room in the end, because they would have all left there with nothing if she hadn't been allowed to finish the proper presentation. But no, I think it's that the point I just make is that regardless of, even if it's a team meeting or a board meeting or some big thing, the setting shouldn't change your approach and your mindset to the outcome that you are desiring, and particularly when it comes to this example.
Yeah, fantastic. So let's move on to our last example. So Bianca, you as a media commentator have a topic that you're pretty passionate about. So can you talk about the bias that occurs around media representation of women?
Yeah, I mean, I said earlier, I've been a journalist for a long time before moving into the world of business. And what hasn't changed a lot is the number of women in those senior editor-in-chief, really influential driving roles in the media. What we have seen is a shift around the number of women as journalists and those more senior journalist roles and things like that. And I'm quite excited when I do see a female editor-in-chief pop up and things like that, because slowly we are moving and progressing. I suppose the big thing when you talk about why does this matter, it's really about the narratives and what you're reflecting in society, and how those decisions that are being made on what stories we do cover and the voices that we cover within those stories are played out. And I think at the moment we still have this landscape that it continues to be male dominated, and that is reflective of so many other industries, right? So we do need to see that shift, and you know, how does that shift? We're still seeing that in management roles, it's just kind of petering out. Parenthood plays a role, and all these different other biases creep in there. But certainly, from a communications perspective, the more we can change the narrative in what it is that we read, be it even on social media, which we do see women engage far more, although I think our algorithms skew us to what we even get to read, ever more so. But in the mainstream press, I think it's increasingly important that we do start to shift that gender disparity. Groups like Women in Media, Women's Agenda, different things like that have a critical role to play in shifting the dialogue. But these major mastheads do as well, and there are some terrific male and female representatives out there trying to play a bit. But I certainly would like to see that shift, because I think it really affects the way we see ourselves, and young generations do too.
Absolutely. So, Jay, what thoughts do you have on this?
Well, going back to the point that Bianca made earlier, and obviously you need a megaphone so that your daughter can hear you when you're at netball. What's amazing in Australia particularly, I don't know if this is a global phenomenon, is how many women now are reporting on very male-dominated sports. And it's fantastic to see it because I think and maybe sport is this, and Penelope, you'd know more than me, but it seems that sport maybe is somewhat taking us on a leadership journey, because we're normalizing things like that. I mean, when would you have ever thought you'd have a female on the panel of the footy show, or the sideline reporter being a female, mixing it in with the boys? Obviously, there's the female sport as well, which is fine. But in this case, as a man, it's become very obvious to me, and it's fantastic. So from a media point of view, it does seem that sport may be taking us on a path to some success. The other thing that I think happens with media, particularly with female journalists, where they're interviewing men, is the positioning of that interview, because men by nature seem to just take a dominant position. And if it's a TV, and I've been interviewed on countless interviews in TV and radio, but particularly TV, where a consciousness of positioning enables the journalist to feel more empowered, particularly if it's an awkward subject being discussed. That's been an experience I've had, and I think some are really good at that and they're conscious of it, or it may be that the producers, who often is a woman in most cases, actually, from my experience. But it's an interesting space, and it's one that probably doesn't get much airtime, pardon the pun, because they're busy reporting rather than talking about their own situations.
Yeah, good point. Penelope, what are your thoughts?
I was really struck by there's some UNESCO data out a few years ago that showed that when the media interviews experts, only 25% of the time is that expert a woman. And I do remember talking to Dr. Leonora Rees, who's a very prominent Australian economist and the head of Women in Economics. And she was telling me one of the things that they had done in that organisation is ring up media outlets and say, why don't you interview women economists? We are very good and we're very numerous and we never get phone calls from you guys. And they said, oh, we don't know who they are. And they said, well, let us tell you. And they actually generated a list of top female economists with different areas of specialisation, all their contact details, and they gave that to all the media outlets. And they do get calls, and the ABC has been very scrupulous on this in terms of gender representation, and they've had an incredible impact. I've forgotten the exact proportionate increase in women economists being consulted as experts, but it's very significant. I thought, isn't Leonora clever to have thought of that intervention? I wonder how many more interventions of that kind there could be, just literally putting a list in a journalist's hands so they can ring more people than they currently have in their little black book or whatever journalists use. Bianca would know.
That's a great example, because Leonora actually won the Gender Equity Awards for that very reason. But part of it was that it changed the pipeline for women into economics, and so a number of more women had actually signed up to be economists, and they cited the fact that they'd see them in the media was the major reason, which is pretty amazing. So Tyler, what are your thoughts on this?
Look, this is not my area of expertise. I knew I was going to learn a lot from you folks on this call. However, just along the sports, if I'm not at work, I'm at a sports game, right? And like Bianca, and unless I'm at my kids' sports games, but women in sport is increasing hugely. I'm in North Carolina at the moment, and going to baseball games, they have female announcers, they have females on the sidelines, and I think getting that different perspective is really cool. And the first time I heard a New York Yankees broadcast on the radio, their primary announcer is a female, and I thought that's pretty cool. One of the most storied franchises in all of sport, let alone baseball, is a female announcer, and I think don't stop there. Keep it going.
Fabulous. Well, what a fabulous discussion. I think we've all learned a great deal about why communication biases continue in the workplace, and hopefully we've touched on some simple roadmaps that can be implemented. Just a quick run around. Bianca, do you have any other tips or ideas that you'd like to add for people listening?
I think I was going to say something a little bit more about what you see in terms of the media. I'd like to see it progress further. I still feel like I used to way back in the day do radio for the ABC, and I was always acutely aware of where I'd place certain things in the bulletin. And it still frustrates me to no end, recently listening to who won the state of origin for women occur at the very end of the bulletin, as opposed to some offshore game that really had little audience resonance to our local area anyway. And I still feel that there is this bias there around placement and sport, around who dominates the viewership. And I had hoped that the Matildas would have whacked that out of the park somewhat. So I think we've still got some way to go. And when we talk about the reporters who are presenting on the footy show and different things like that, I love seeing that too. I wish that the likes of Channel 9, however, wouldn't just have reporters giving updates on medical issues and things like that. But, you've got a lot of reporters there who actually do play the sport, multiple codes at a national level that could add more value. And you do see that a little bit on Stan and things like that, but I'd like to see that go further. So still work to do. And I think the more we can do from a takeaway perspective in celebrating the progress that's happening from a internally company perspective, and calling out, hey, we're doing this, and actually genuinely not pink washing, gender washing, anything, but we're doing this and we're doing it really well with pride, the better we will place from a competitive national perspective going forward with the challenges we've got coming out of the US, which can't be not discussed at this forum. As far as I'm concerned, it's a real headwind that we have to tackle as a nation. It's our opportunity to lead here more so than ever before.
Very, very good point. And I think it's been nice to see that Australia's actually taken a bit more of a positive stance on this. Jay, do you have anything else that you'd like to share?
Well, the only thing I'd say is for any of the men on the call, lean in more. I mean, I certainly from my experience in Geneva, I've become much more conscious of leaning in when I see things that I just don't think are right, and speaking up, and not to feel intimidated or embarrassed about the fact that you're calling these things out. I think sometimes men sort of now feel a bit more, I'm not sure, should I say something or should I? Well, you should. Just lean in. That would be my piece of feedback.
Yeah, I love it. And look, I think it's been proven, there's a lot of stats behind it, that, by not stepping in, you're tacitly approving the bad behaviour. So actually, it's important that everybody does lean in and make some comment. Penelope, what are your thoughts?
One thing we haven't talked about yet, but I thought it was worth adding, is about amplification, which is a really easy and positive thing that we can all do, men and women, everybody. And one example is one I heard from Federal Parliament, which may or may not be true, but it's a rang true, so I'm just going to repeat it here. I've heard that this has been the case in the Labor cabinet maybe a couple of years ago, where there was an explicit agreement among senior women, which I believe included people like Penny Wong and Tanya Plibersek and some others, I don't know, to amplify each other. which means that when one of them says something and their comment is overlooked and the conversation moves on until a man later says the same thing and gets credit for it, they would just say, yeah, as Penny Wong said earlier, I really think that is a good idea, that has some merit or whatever. So just amplifying when women do share their thoughts, even if they are at first overlooked or the ideas are taken forward by men who then take the credit for them, maybe not intentionally, just to amplify that woman's contribution. It's really, really easy, and it's very positive. Again, no one minds. People, it's a way of subtly drawing attention to the fact that that woman made the contribution.
Yeah, nice. I love it. Tyler, any last thoughts or tips?
Yeah, a couple of key takeaways for me. I think the first thing I'm going to do is get onto Audible and see The Authority Gap. Check out that book. I think that sounds like it's something I can learn a lot from. I think that concept of being intentional as a leader in business and having that absolute intentional focus to, raise awareness, to take the lead, to make sure things are getting done right, having that meeting protocol, which I loved. And I was amazed that stat 25% less speaking time in meetings for women. I'm amazed by that. So I'm going to go through our Clary co-pilot calls like I do every week and make sure I've got to get some statistics on that. I'm a bit of a statistics geek myself. So I think that's really, really neat. And I love that concept of amplification, which, I think we can all play a role in doing.
Wonderful. Thank you. So what a fabulous discussion. Remember, for people listening, there's only 2 days left to submit your application or accept your nomination. If you want to be recognised as a male ally and receive access to lots of useful information, we do have a lot of that on our Gender Equity Awards website and a lot of roadmaps to help people. A huge thank you to our panellists for sharing their experiences and their ideas. So thank you to Bianca, to Penelope, to Tyler, and to Jay. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.